The forest never asked for permission to whisper secrets. It just did. Jack had learned to listen. The creak of branches, the language of wind through pine needles, the hush before a storm. That night, when thunder shattered the sky and rain came down like punishment, something else spoke louder. A cry. A human one, panicked, sharp, real. That moment shifted everything. He sprinted without a thought for himself, boots slipping on soaked leaves, heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. And there she was, Emily, shivering, blood on her ankle, eyes full of fear and disbelief. She looked like she belonged to another world, her coat tailored, her makeup smudged but elegant. Yet in that storm, she was just lost. And Jack had found her. She resisted at first. Of course she did. Who wouldn't? A stranger in the middle of nowhere offering help? But Jack didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around her with a quiet strength that told her, maybe for the first time in a long time, that someone cared without expecting anything back. This wasn't a hero moment. This was just a real story beginning in the mud. The cabin was no palace. A flickering fire, hand-carved furniture, a kettle already on from his return. But it had warmth, and it had Jack. He cleaned her wounds, offered silence instead of questions, and when their eyes met under firelight, it wasn't fireworks. It was something slower, deeper. The kind of stillness where romance grows roots before either person even notices. Emily didn't speak much that first night. Her hands trembled when he handed her a blanket. He could tell she wasn't used to being vulnerable, used to controlling her world. But vulnerability doesn't ask for permission. It seeps in through broken ankles and cracked pride. In her silence, Jack found a mirror of his own loneliness. That was the emotional story neither of them knew they were writing. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, something quiet was blooming. Jack sat across the room, not watching her, but aware. The air felt charged, not with lust, but with recognition. A strange familiarity. Two souls that had nothing in common, yet felt known. Like finding a forgotten photograph and knowing it belongs in your hands. That's where all touching stories begin, in the unexpected. And as Emily drifted off, cocooned in the stranger's cabin, Jack stayed awake. He wasn't thinking about fate or romance. He was just there, present, breathing, listening to the fire crackle. But deep in his gut, he knew storms didn't just pass through to destroy. Sometimes they revealed the path ahead, even if that path led straight through pain, past, and everything he thought he'd buried. Morning broke like a false promise, soft light filtering through the window, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Jack noticed her last name stitched inside her coat, and when he asked, her answer hit like a blade. Emily Harrow. His breath caught. That name was carved into his past like a scar. Her father had destroyed everything. His home, his family's peace, their very sense of belonging. You're Charles Harrow's daughter? His voice cracked, more disbelief than rage. She sat up, stunned by the shift in him. What was calm turned storm. Jack's words came fast, a wave of hurt he hadn't let out in years. This wasn't about property, it was about dignity. About losing the land where his mother had sung to the trees, where childhood dreams were buried in bulldozer tracks. A real story turning bitter. Emily didn't fight back. She didn't deny it. Her eyes brimmed with tears not of guilt, but of a pain she'd locked away. I didn't choose him, she whispered. He barely chooses me. Her voice trembled, more child than heiress. She didn't want to be seen as a villain, but as a daughter begging to be loved. The room wasn't filled with enemies. It held two broken people standing in their own wreckage. Jack looked at her, really looked. The anger throbbed in his chest, but so did something else. Confusion, compassion, a flicker of everything they'd shared the night before. Could she be more than her last name? Could he believe in what his heart was whispering, even if his past was screaming? This was no longer just an emotional story about loss. It was about choice. Emily didn't try to justify her father. Instead, she opened wounds. She spoke of cold dinners, absent birthdays, public perfection hiding private distance. Her voice broke when she said she'd give up the estate if it meant being seen, just once, for who she really was. And in that moment, Jack saw not a threat, but a girl who'd been surviving in a world built on conditions. The fire that once warmed them now cast shadows. The room was heavy with everything unsaid, and yet their silence spoke louder than any outburst. He turned away, pacing. She stayed still, bracing herself. But even in their hurt, neither of them left. That's how you know something is real. Not when it's easy, but when it's hard and you still stay. Touching stories don't skip the heartbreak. They pass through it. And Jack, for all his fury, knew one thing. If he walked away now, he'd be haunted forever. Not by her last name, but by the chance he didn't take. The next move wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love. It was just staying, breathing in the same room, and wondering if two people from opposite worlds could find healing. Maybe the storm wasn't the end after all, but a strange beginning. It started with a shiver, then a cough. Emily's body, already exhausted, couldn't keep up with the emotional weight she carried. By nightfall, she was burning up, skin flushed, breath shallow, eyes lost in fevered memories. Jack, without a word, wrapped her in every blanket he had, his rugged hands now gentle, wiping her brow. The forest had taught him survival. Now it asked him to care. He listened as she mumbled through dreams, fragments of childhood sorrow, unanswered calls, a father who never came home. She whispered names Jack didn't know, and one word over and over, please. It wasn't directed at him. It came from some deep, buried part of her. And in those fragile hours, Jack saw her not as the girl with secrets, but as someone whose soul had never been held right. He didn't sleep. He sat by her side all night, feeding her sips of water, changing the damp cloth on her forehead. The fire crackled quietly. Outside, the forest was calm, like it too was watching over her. There was no dramatic kiss, no swelling music, just the quiet act of presence. And sometimes, in a real story, that's the most romantic thing of all, being there when someone needs you the most. By morning, her fever eased. She stirred, groggy and confused, but Jack was there. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Something softer than words, stronger than time. She reached for his hand, and he didn't flinch. His calloused fingers closed around hers. Not tightly, just enough. It was a quiet gesture, but one that said, I see you. I stayed. They didn't talk much. There was no need. Emily sat up slowly, her strength returning in small steps. Jack brewed her tea made from wild herbs, and she drank it with the humility of someone learning how to receive care. And in that simple exchange, tea, smiles, silence, a new trust was born. Not flashy, not fast, but honest. Like the kind of love you don't even realize is happening until it already has. He watched her from across the room, her frame still pale, but her spirit warming. And he thought, maybe he'd judge her too quickly. Maybe pain didn't wear just one face. And maybe, just maybe, this woman, this stranger-turned confession, wasn't sent to ruin his world. Maybe she was here to rebuild something inside him he thought was long gone. That's what touching stories do. They rewrite the heart. But Jack didn't say that. He just handed her a cup of tea and sat back in his chair. No declarations. No promises. Just two people breathing in the same moment, unsure of what came next, but knowing somehow the storm between them had started to clear. The sun finally broke through the clouds, and with it came a quiet resolve. Emily insisted she was strong enough to leave the cabin. Jack didn't argue. He just packed water, a rope, and that wild herb tea she'd grown to love. They walked in silence, the forest alive again. It smelled of moss and rain and possibilities. But the trail was slick, deceptive. And then, in one instant, she was gone. Jack's heart stopped. He heard the crack of branches, the scramble of boots, then silence. He rushed forward, dropping to his knees, finding her several feet below in a narrow ravine. She was conscious but shaken, a scrape on her cheek, tears threatening to fall. I'm okay, she whispered, but her voice trembled. Jack didn't hesitate. He climbed down, hands burning against stone and bark. For her, down there, in that strange cradle of earth, the world felt far away. They sat side by side in a pocket of silence. Emily leaned her head back against the stone wall and exhaled, as if all her strength had run out. "No one ever comes for me," she said quietly, not accusing, just stating a truth. Jack didn't answer. He simply moved closer, letting his presence say what words couldn't. He told her about his mother, how she taught him to read the stars, how she'd whisper to trees like they could talk back, about the day the bulldozers came and silence swallowed everything. Emily listened like a child hearing a bedtime story for the first time. Her hand, covered in dirt, found his. And again, he didn't flinch. The connection now felt instinctive, like breathing. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. Some emotions are louder and quiet. Their shoulders touched. Their knees brushed. Jack looked at her like he'd never seen her before, and somehow, also like he always had. And in that tiny ravine, where the world couldn't find them, a fragile love began to take shape. Not forced, not rushed, just there, rooted in shared pain and unspoken hopes. The hours passed slowly. Jack eventually helped her climb out, his grip steady, his gaze constant. She smiled, small but real, as if she had borrowed his courage just long enough to believe in herself. And maybe that's what love is in a real story. Passing each other pieces of strength until neither of you remembers who was broken first. They reached the path again, both changed, both quieter, but in the silence, something was louder than ever. A kind of knowing, a bond formed not by words, but by experience, by holding each other in the dark and realizing they didn't want to let go. The city was loud, not just with traffic and chatter, but with expectations, headlines, demands. Emily returned to it with Jack beside her, yet they felt like visitors in each other's lives. He didn't belong in penthouses and press conferences. She didn't belong in silence anymore. They sat in her apartment, surrounded by things too polished, too cold. And suddenly, the cabin felt like home. This didn't. Jack avoided cameras. He spoke with few words, avoided the spotlight that clung to Emily like a shadow. He didn't resent her world. He just didn't want to be swallowed by it. But the more he stayed quiet, the more the pressure grew, until Charles, Emily's father, stepped in with an offer. A warning masked as kindness. "Leave her, or I'll make sure you never work, never breathe without my reach." Emily begged him not to go, but Jack knew what power could do. He'd seen it crush communities, families, spirits. He couldn't be the wedge between her and everything she'd built, even if her world felt like a prison. So he walked, not out of pride, but love. The kind that sacrifices silently. That's the emotional story people rarely tell. The one where leaving is the most loyal thing you can do. Emily sent a letter. No assistance, no email, just ink, paper, and truth. She wrote about missing silence, about fires that didn't come from fame, about wanting someone who chose her, not what she represented. It was raw, honest, and Jack read it every night, folded neatly in his coat pocket like a secret prayer. Then, one call changed everything. Her father had disappeared, lost somewhere near the edge of the forest. Search teams failed. Helicopters circled, but Emily knew where to turn. To the one man who didn't need GPS to find what was lost. Jack. No hesitation. No questions. He packed his bag, left his tools, and stepped back into the woods. Not for Charles. For her. Days passed before Jack found him. Weak, soaked, near hypothermic. And yet Jack carried him back, step by step, as if he'd never once cursed the name Harrow. Because in a real story, revenge never heals what love already forgave. Emily met them at the cabin. She fell into Jack's arms, not with drama, but with that quiet desperation only true love knows. And as they sat by the fire once again, Emily, Jack, and a humbled father recovering on the old sofa, no words were spoken. But in that silence, something was decided, not just between lovers, but between a past that hurt and a future that might finally begin to heal. 1 year later, the forest sang again, but now with new voices. Jack and Emily didn't just return, they built. Hearth Hollow wasn't a resort or retreat, it was a sanctuary, a healing center tucked among the trees, where people came to remember who they were before the world broke them. Survivors, dreamers, wanderers. Real people with real wounds. That was their legacy, turning pain into refuge. Emily stood before a gathering of those souls one quiet morning, her voice steady but warm. This place, she said, wasn't built with money. It was built with choice. The choice to love. The choice to forgive. Behind her, Jack stood with dirt on his hands and pride in his eyes. He'd carved every beam, laid every stone. And for the first time, her name meant something more than power. It meant purpose. Charles sat quietly in the crowd. Older, softer, watching his daughter become something no boardroom had ever allowed. A woman free to be vulnerable, bold, and fully seen. He didn't clap the loudest, but he smiled the longest. That was his apology. Not in words, but in presence. And sometimes in touching stories, that's all it takes, being there, finally. After the speech, Jack took her hand. He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. He pulled from his pocket a ring carved from pine wood. Smooth, light, shaped by his own hands. It's not gold, he whispered, but it's strong. Like us. Emily blinked back tears. Not because it wasn't perfect, but because it was a proposal that came not from extravagance, but from everything they'd survived. The crowd erupted in soft cheers and teary smiles. Not because it was a fairy tale, but because it wasn't. It was a real story full of mud and fire, of arguments and quiet forgiveness, of slow mornings and second chances. They didn't promise forever. They promised today and tomorrow, and every day they'd fight to keep choosing each other. That was enough. At night, under the stars, they danced barefoot on the grass. No music, just crickets, wind, and heartbeats. Emily leaned into him, whispering, "This feels like home." Jack pulled her closer, his voice low. "It is home, because you're in it. No need to say more. Some love stories don't need poetry. They are poetry." And as the fire crackled and the wind moved through the trees like an old friend, something unspoken lingered in the air. A beginning wrapped in an ending. A story that didn't close with happily ever after, but with something stronger, a love that survived everything and was only just beginning. And now I have to ask you, would you have walked away like Jack did, just to protect someone you love? Or would you have stayed and fought, even if the whole world was against you? Have you ever loved someone so deeply, yet felt you didn't belong in their world? Because sometimes the hardest part isn't falling in love, it's surviving what comes after. Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to know how you would have handled this. And if this emotional story touched something in your heart, don't forget to like the video. It helps more people find real stories like this one. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next touching story that just might change how you see love, sacrifice, or yourself.